Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another Midweek with Meaning. I'm really excited for this today because I have a guest joining us. I'll tell you more about that in a moment, but you are with Angela Ward. I'm a registered nurse and soul midwife, helping you to journey within and return renewed. We do Midweek with Meaning every week, focusing on different topics. And the topic over this last month has really been around ancestors and the thin veil, that place where we are maybe experiencing our relationship to death and to grief. And today we're going to dive a little deeper into connecting with our ancestors. So as you're coming on, as you're watching, please say hello. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And we will do some questions and answers later. If you're watching the replay, please put replay in the comments. And of course, if you're watching on any of the places where you can follow, like, subscribe, share, please do all of that. We are so excited about it. So let's get started. Today in this Midweek with Meaning, we are speaking with Kirra Swenerton. She is an edge walker, a healing artist, and a scientist who specializes in restoration ecology, ancestral reverence, and earth honoring ritual. Kirra teaches about animism, ethnobotany, and ecology, and is dedicated to conserving rare species and tending wild places. Kirra leads devotional rituals for people seeking guidance from the wild world, and their deep ancestral roots is what we're going to be talking about today. Kirra's own ancestors settled in California from the British Isles and Ireland, Armenia, and Italy. She is a botanical storykeeper, an ally to the native plants of her birthplace in the San Francisco Bay Area. In 2015, Kirra founded Root Wisdom, an organization offering wilderness journeys, environmental consulting, psychedelic support, and ceremonial services. And most recently, this year in 2021, became the custodian to 418 acres of wildland in the Eel River watershed in Northern California. You can reach Kirra at rootwisdom.com. And so everyone, as you're watching, please give a warm welcome to Kirra. Here she is. Hello, Kirra.
Hello, Angela and everyone.
Hello. We got that little static back again, my friend. So
Apologies. Let's see.
In the wild place. Are you at the Eel River right now?
I'm in the Eel River watershed. I'm on a place called, our place is yet without a name, but we're on the confluence of two creeks. One is called Spring Creek and another is Tomkai Creek. And these are the traditional homelands of the Huchnom people, which are, I'm going to try this, plug this thing in here. See if this does any.
For sure. The reason I asked about the Eel River.
Better?
Yes. Can you hear me? Good.
Yeah.
The reason I asked about the Eel River, because it was really like static electricity. Maybe that was the Eel River spirit coming in to be like, zzz, zzz.
Well, if it's buzzing, I'm guessing it's the tree full of bees that's about 100 feet away from where we're talking.
Wow. It sounds like a really magical place you've come into stewardship with. Yeah. Well, I know you've been studying ancestral wisdom and healing for quite a while now. And I'd like to begin our conversation getting your perspective about what is it about this season and the time of the year in a lot of Western traditions, or in many different traditions, that this is the time that we would consider where we can access our ancestors a little bit more fully. Could you speak to that?
Well, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, this is the time where we're moving into the dark season. So already there's a larger pattern network that moves and affects all of us. So even those of us that are living in, modern situations with, fluorescent light cubicles and things like that are still affected by the change in light and the change in temperature and this sort of movement towards like colder, more internal focused time. So there's absolutely an effect that is happening, not just to humans, but to the world around us. And we can feel it. We know it. It's time to get cozy and to be more quiet. And if you think about how our ancestors were living, I mean, you can't necessarily get like a mango or avocado all year round. So, this is the time that's just post harvest, and it's a time for giving thanks for food, for making prayers, asking for support to make it through winter, which is hard. Winter is hard, and now for those of us who live in positions of privilege and can get food all the time, we might experience that with some people experience, a extra wave of depression or difficulty just getting through those periods of time. I know when, I was living up in the Seattle area with you, coming from California, just the being further north and having more rain, winters were harder for me there, and so there's a piece about surviving the winter. And so that's what's going on in the lives of the living. And there's a need for help. And so there's this opportunity to mark the season, to notice the sort of passage of time, to notice that, we're at this crossroads between the equinox and the solstice. And so, it's not just those 4 points, there's these liminal times in between. So particularly in Celtic traditions, from the Celtic aspect and sides of my family, this is the time getting up towards Samhain. So this is a liminal time. It's a space in between. It's a in between place to count, on that cycle within that wheel. And those are the moments. Those are the moments where we can really feel the nearness of the other world, the unseen world, the spiritual world. And we're feeling it in our bodies. We're noticing it in the seasons. We're noticing it in the change of light. And it's an opportunity. So all these rituals and traditions that are connected to this time of year in many different parts of the world are really being driven by those deep seasonal changes. Like, we are part of this earth and we experience those changes, even though many of us now don't feel super connected, but this is an opportunity to ride on the energy of the season and go deep in an inner way.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think that's really true. I think that is one thing about living in the Pacific Northwest where I am, is that I really do feel the change of seasons. Seattle is very clear, it's fall. Everything is definitely fall, and the light has shifted dramatically, and everything is shedding. There's still, of course, some thriving little plants that do just fine now, but the trees are dropping their leaves. My garden is going dormant, as it does, and my chickens have lost all their feathers because it's the time to molt. It's winter feathers. But I love that you brought Samhain up, and part of my Mexican heritage is around the Day of the Dead, which follows right in around the same time of really where that veil is thin and we can connect more to our ancestors that have really supported us in thriving through these seasons, right? The skills that we've learned and the traditions that we've gathered. Could you tell me your thoughts about why is it important for us to have a relationship or connection to our ancestral roots?
Well, I was, running about the ranch doing morning things this morning, and asking the powers that be in this place to, let me know what they want me to say about these topics. So they're weighing in on these questions as well. And the message
real quick too. Hang on, can you wiggle a cord or whatever you got there? Oh, let's see. That seemed like it fixed it. Okay, keep going.
Okay. So the thing. The message that came through this morning was, it's about remembering that we're children. really every person alive right now is someone's child. You know, every acorn on the ground under this big oak tree is a child of that tree. You know, every plant that's growing, everything that's alive right now came from someone, something that came and lived and died before. And so there is a sense of rootedness and connectivity that's possible when we understand like our actual role. You know, what's the meaning of life? You know, it's part of its understanding that we're children. We're here amongst the living, and that is a special position to be in, but it's not the only position that we will experience. It's what we're in now. And I find so much comfort in remembering, especially as I get older and, you know, supposedly wiser, that I'm a child. I'm a child. And being able to access that, thinking about who my parents are, those who are amongst the living. I mean, not all of us have living parents. I even had a living grandfather up until, you know, just before the pandemic, who lived to 97 years old. So I've had amazing access to living elders. But what happens, like, you know, what happens when those ones have passed on and all those who have come before them, to situate ourselves within a lineage, and not just with those ones that we knew, like our own parents or possibly grandparents, no matter what the quality of those relationships were like. We come from so many more people, so many more layers and layers and layers of people, and we are in fact the children of survivors. So whatever we think about ourselves, there are those who came before us, who lived and died so that we can be here, and that deserves some attention and some recognition.
I love that. I love that. I want to say a few words, but we're still getting a little bit of the bees, so I don't know if you can maybe just poke around with that for a sec. But I love this reminder of being children. As you said that, I have this sense of humility in a way that came over me, as well as a sense of, I don't know, being held in a way. Like,
Right.
oh, there's something about, I mean, I'm lucky to have living parents right now and haven't had any living grandparents for a while, but had a good relationship with them when they were here. But I'm so interested in not only them, but even how much further back and back and back this goes once we start looking at that maybe we didn't have ideal relationships with our living elders, but that we are resilient. We come from a long lineage of deep resilience that's gotten us here. But yeah, I hadn't really thought of it that way, of being a child, you know, and even now as an old lady. Yeah. So how does one begin making a deeper connection to our living and perhaps passed on ancestors? How do we start that seeking?
Right. Well, you know, if you're lucky enough to be someone who has grown up with some tradition around that, some intact tradition, like, you know, you have said to me before that, you know, in your family, you make offerings, you make ofrendas every year, you know, and that's wonderful. Not everybody has that, you know. And so doing what people have done before is a way to nod to those old ones, to remember those old ones, making the foods that they have made before, having objects or art and things that they've created, clothing, music. It doesn't even have to be something that you inherited, like a direct practice, because, you know, being an American, there's just been so much lost, and there's a lot of grief in there, and that is one thing that stops people, I think, from exploring too much further back, because we know either on an intellectual level or maybe just like on a more unconscious level that there's pain and there's trouble back there, both trouble that our people encounter, maybe on the loss of homeland ourselves or the feeling of homeland of others, whether it's like harms done or harms received, we know that that's out there. So my recommendation in the way that I have learned to approach this in a safer way, ritually sort of safer way, is to begin with considering and inviting connection to a very sort of like specific quality of ancestral contact. So what I'm talking about are the much, much older ones, like the elders amongst our own ancestors, like reaching our thoughts, our imagination, our dreams back to ones who lived at a time where they were in right relationship with the lands and waters, where they were in a home, in their home place, where they did have intact culture, and that exists for all of us on every lineage, no matter the history, the rocky history, between us and them. So this idea of making offerings, that is not unique to, indigenous cultures of, Mexico, what's known as Mexico. There's offering practices are a way of worldwide way of feeding those ones who have gone before, who don't have mouths to eat, doing dances where our bodies, like where else could they possibly be alive but here now, we're the ones amongst the living. So all the things that living people can do, sing, dance.
Pause for just a second, if you would, Kirra. I love this, and I think we do need to tweak the technical piece once and for all, because you're saying
my apologies.
Good shit, and I wanted to be able to capture the quality of the sound. If you could go to the part on our screen that says camera mic, and maybe see if you could switch out your mic somehow, because that was so good. And it was overlaid. It was like this super cool Dune deep echo voice. I don't know if you've seen the new Dune.
How are we now?
I've
changed something.
Oh,
okay.
Something is better.
Something is better. Sorry for this. I'm here kind of on the edge of the grid. So
I love it. I mean,
thank you for sticking with me.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for being willing to keep going and figuring it out. It's the eel spirit and the bees. I'm pretty sure of it.
Persistence is how our people got here. We will persist.
We're going to figure this out. We're going to figure it out. Let's talk a little bit more about, maybe people that are watching don't actually understand what an ofrenda is. Could you maybe speak to that? And then could you speak a little bit more about this concept of offering? And I loved what you were saying about bringing dance into our bodies that are maybe ancestral traditional dances or foods and things like that. But could you riff on that a little bit?
Well, I could talk about like a general offering practice, but ofrendas probably have a specific meaning that more than I do. Would you be willing to share a little bit about what you do?
Just my understanding and practice is that it's creating a space in your home for them to dwell, for your ancestors to dwell. Like a little like concentrated space of like their little place on the shelf, so you can stop by and engage with them and bring offerings there, and just kind of recall them, in our minds day to day. And for me, I always feel like I have some intentional altar spaces with my ancestors year round, but I try to bring them more to mind this time of year, because it's part of the tradition, but it's also like, what might they delight in, and there's also this concept of, spirit, and then that goes into ghouls and scary and sugar skulls and things like that, which is like, there's something also about walking that space, that's that liminal space close to death, and the reminder of death. I think we're really good at ignoring it most of the year, most of the time, unless, pandemics and crazy shit's happening. And I think our fear of death really drives us in this country a lot. And yet there's something, to me, delightful about the kind of like, ooh, a little bit of scary. How much closer am I to my own death? But then also there's this like, I don't know, kind of peace about it, because it's like, well, there's all my people. Like, I got more people over there than I got over here, in a way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think about that in terms of, the ones who are coming in and being born too. Like there is a bit of a circle there, ones who are coming in, like the new babies are most recently on the other side. They're open. And so it definitely takes some effort to keep oneself open, as the world kind of closes in on us, and the stories and like these other sort of realities have taken hold, but whether it's a joke, whether it's like some like black fishnets from Hot Topic at the mall, or you know some sort of like witchy ghouly outfit. It's sort of, the truth is hiding in plain sight, within these traditions that maybe have turned into these like, consumption marketing opportunities just to sell us like, candy corn or whatever crappy stuff is out there.
Say
But
more
it's
about
like,
that. What's the truth in plain sight?
it's the truth in plain sight is that, the dead are not really dead. The dead are alive in a way. Like, there is a sense of spirit that people have permission to lean into, because it's sort of like a joke, or they're playing dress up or whatever. But this idea of putting on a special garb, putting on something special to mark and to, in some ways, protect ourselves. These ideas of dressing up as ghouls, it's not necessarily because we're trying to embody ghoulish energy in the world, but it's sometimes to scare off the scary stuff, because this is the thing. When the veil is thin, it's not all, unicorns and fluffy clouds and Care Bears on the other side of the veil. It's everything. It's everything. It's the dark, it's the light, it's everything in between. And so there's an opportunity to have deeper contact through the things like what you were saying about like having a place, making a place for them in our homes, feeding them directly, talking to them directly. And there's an absolute difference between talking about the dead, talking about our ancestors. We're kind of talking about them today. You and I are having this conversation, but you and I could also have direct conversations with our own ancestors, but being specific about which ones we're inviting into our homes. The ghouly ones, the troubled dead, they're out there, or those elevated elder ancestors that can bring, blessing and guidance and all the rest of that to us. So we have a say, we can be in a consensual relationship with the spirit world, and I think that is something that goes untaught and unspoken, as people who come from broken traditions go dabbling around in this stuff. People get scared, and a healthy amount of caution is not a bad thing, but there is more. There's that piece that's attractive. What's out there in the dark. And that, I think, is them calling to us. That attraction, following that line of curiosity is part of the way that they're speaking to us. And even if it's hidden in these, these things that seem silly now, it's not lost.
Can I ask a little bit about that? Because I think you're touching on something really important. And I think some of our viewers watching this might think that we're getting out there and being woo. But when I think about this, I'm considering like, I really appreciate that you say the troubled dead, because when I consider the amount of trauma that is just with people that are alive in our society right now, and if we consider back, like even in my own family lineage, to consider the amount of violence and abuse that my elders and their elders and their elders experienced, there definitely are people in my lineage that I don't think would be healthy for me to have a relationship with, or living or not, right? So how does one who has maybe a direct experience of trauma with probably maybe more recently dead, or like, like what I mean is like parents, grandparents, people that have like more recently crossed than the like way back 1400s ancestors, how might they move in this way safely? And I love that you said something about the consensual relationship. How does one do that?
Right. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's, everyone is talking about trauma now. We're like starting to look at it. We're starting to like turn around and look at some of the trouble more directly. And I think that's a good thing. However, there is always a risk that, we can, go down with the ship, go down with the grief, go down with the kind of the immensity of what we maybe know from history, know from personal experience, or sort of just suspect what is out there. And I think that is a barrier to many people because it's scary. So it's pretty practical, and I hope this rings true to those who are listening to this, whether you are, of the woo persuasion or or whatever. Just consider this. If I am suffering personally in my life, if I've got an injury, if I've got some wounding, if I need support, I am not going to go leaning on some rotten old piece of wood to like prop myself up, like that's going to collapse underneath me. I'm going to hold on to the big tree with the deep roots, the healthy, strong, grounded ones. And it's the same thing once working with your ancestors. Even though maybe you had a positive relationship or memories with like a grandparent or someone who's passed, even if you feel them moving in your life in beneficial ways, they themselves may be in a state of disrepair, because this trauma, we talk about inherited trauma, we see patterns, we see health conditions, we see all this kind of stuff.
Legit thing, yes, like literally inherited. Yeah.
Right. We're starting to see this in different ways. I mean, it can be things like behavioral patterns, right? Like it can also be things like blessings and talents. We're not just downstream of trauma. And so that is kind of like where the help comes in. You got to weigh the trouble that we've inherited. We're downstream of all the trouble, but we're also downstream of all these resources and these really, really strong ones. And so when I talk about like thinking about ancestors, yes, individual people who lived and died, there were these bodies that we came through. I mean, that's not woo. We came through. we came through bodies.
Yes.
We came through bodies. And we inherited things. We also have inherited things like material wealth. Some of us, some of us know, some of us patterns of poverty or other things like that. So starting to think about what we've inherited in a broader way. It can be material stuff. It can be talents and skills that were passed down, things that were taught in lifetimes. It can be like traditions, and, and some people's last names will carry like the profession, like of the person, like, I don't know. I'd think of the word Cooper. That's like someone who built barrels. I mean, not that we live in a world with a lot of barrels now, but like, that there are things like that move through family lines. So there's also blessings. There's also skills. There's also, I mean, even things like physical beauty, or big hips that are going to help you birth babies without so much risk. All sorts of stuff. So when I think about being in contact with those older ones, being aware that trauma exists and there are troubled dead out there, then I think about, where does that strong, deeply rooted tree exist? I have to go way upstream in some cases. Like, you mentioned, talked a little bit about my ancestry in the intro, and I have some ancestors that are from Western Asia in Armenia. And that part of the world, it's not just like, 500 years of colonialism. We're talking about like, 10,000 years of waves of empire after empire, and a lot of shifts and transitions. So if you start to think into a little bit deeper time about what our people have experienced in the different places that they're from, I had to start with such old ancestors, to really encounter the quality and safety and strength of the energy that I'm talking about, like reach before those traumas started to snowball. And in order to do that, you can't do that through genealogy stuff. You can't do that through even history, especially talking about, a lineage of women or those who birthed babies. If you weren't a property owner, if you weren't of high standing, there's no records. So there's no other way. Like, there's no other way. We're kind of get stripped down, and then you got to go, woo, what else you got? There's no other way to really get at that. And I find it really fascinating. So for an example of, the way that I connect with those older ones is through practices of prayer, through doing what some people might consider like journey work, shamanic journey work. I think of it as going into a place of prayer or trance. It's being quiet, turning down the volume on the mental chatter, the intellectualization, the am I making this up, all the, just like let that stuff just chill out for a minute, and then sit with your direct experience of what is. And over time, it's there, we all have this ability to cultivate those deeper, more subtle senses. And a lot of times it's about just learning to turn down the volume on these filters that we tell ourselves what's real and not real. I just like set that aside. Like, belief, that's something that happens in the head, but I can have direct experience in my body. And so getting into practices like, you and I first connected around dance, and that is a excellent way to get out of your head, right? Like, moving with the music of like traditional music, movements, traditional movements, the ways that our bodies have moved. These are also ways to go into those flow states, prayer states, whatever. Those are the ways that we can connect back to those old ones, because those patterns are in our bodies and they're right here. So no matter if I'm talking about reaching back to something that's 10,000 years old, that can be as simple as the foods. Like, my Mediterranean, Middle Eastern people have been eating olives, for example, for a long time. So when I put that food or those plants or that music into my body, like something clicks for me. And that is where I find like entry points to being receptive and listening to those old ones. And they talk back.
I love that you said
I
that.
love that you said that.
Now I'm getting a feedback.
Now I'm getting a feedback. Whoa.
I love that because it's making me think of resonance when you talk about movement and music and dance. And also, you know, my lineage on one side, I have a family member that was orphaned, and we know little, but very little. And then on another side, like we can only go back with records a certain amount, which is, you know, let's just remember that people didn't even know how to read and write for a very long period of our history, and only certain people did, and only certain people were recorded in certain ways. So I feel like there's like a direct comprehension that only goes so far. But then I've also been really interested in, I've done 23andMe and seeing where the DNA and the mitochondrial DNA and the different haplogroups kind of emerged. And that is such an interesting record. And the only way we've been able to access that is through our bodies. That is so incredible to me that we've been able to see like this is how this lineage has moved through the planet and where they tend to come from. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that kind of approach too. I'm unmuting
It is
you,
so
good to go.
It is so, is it good? Okay. It is so fascinating to me. Like that, it feels like the speed at which these sort of like tools of inquiry are popping up. It's all good timing, right? Like even our ability to be sharing information on this larger scale. There's tons of people that are doing more, like my dad has gotten like super into doing the genealogy stuff. So there's, you know, there's genealogy, there's the DNA, there's these other sort of like deeper ways of connecting and being informed, and they can be collaborative. So I told you a story before about uncovering a lost ancestor that we thought we had no records of, but there's another thing that's coming up for me now. Oh gosh, I've got so many of these like amazing stories now. I'm like, which one to share? And I think I'll share this one. So I did 23andMe a number of years ago, and as you may have noticed, or anyone who's out there who's taken one of these tests, the results change depending on what the pool of information that they have is, you know, to draw from. So the more people that participate, the more they're able to sort of like refine like geographic regions, and it depends on who's participating. So when I first did it, I got this like percentage of my, you know, DNA came from just broadly Western Asia, and it wasn't more specific than that. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know that. I know my people came from Armenia through Turkey, you know, but it didn't really tell me anything new, nothing that I didn't know already. And so, you know, I was really kind of left kind of like with your ancestor who was orphaned. It's like you hit a wall. There's like no more information available. And so I had been working on these other, more spirit-based ways of getting information, learning. And I remember sitting in prayer, connecting with my father's mother's people, and those older grandmothers behind her that come from Armenia, and just being curious what they wanted to show me and tell me about those people. And I was seeing in my mind's eye, in my inner vision, this image of these rocky cliffs with like doorways and carved into them, kind of like the only reference I had at the time was those these like Anasazi cliff dwelling things, you know. And I was like, that's cool. That's cool. You know, like I take some notes about the things that I dream about. I take some notes about the things that I see. And, you know, and And then I utilized my other skills. I had been looking around. I don't know. I was like, where was I looking? Somehow, like screwing around online, I find these like etchings of some French explorer that went through this part of the world and did these drawings of these cliffs above Lake Van, which is in the eastern part of that region now. And there are these there's a fortress up there, and there's these carved doorways with like prayer inscriptions and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, that's what I saw. That's what I saw. I'm going to learn more about this place. I'm going to read about it. I'm going to see what archaeological information is out there, what's been translated into English. I got really excited learning all about this stuff because I was like, I saw something that paralleled what I'd seen within my inner vision. And time goes on. I hold that, I put that on images on my altar, think about those ones, seeing like you showed me this. I'm going to, put some attention there. And over time, as my 23andMe got updated and more refined, they'll say like what regions you have people like specific ancestry, and Van became one of those regions. It was all of a sudden like that place.
I love
it.
it.
And I'm like, oh yeah, like I was not surprised, but to have these different levels of confirmation come through, or things that we think of as like, I don't know, signs or omens or coincidence or synchronicities. There's a lot of ways to sort of describe those things, but it's like, I don't necessarily see something in a visionary state like this and then like, tomorrow I go and, sell my house and cut my hair or whatever. But it's like, if I get a little hint here and then that's reflected again and again and again, I'm like, okay, all right, thick skull, getting the message. And so that's one way to go about it, is, I didn't necessarily go to my father, who's not, totally grasping or accepting or understanding sort of my approach and way of being. But, I can feed him tidbits of things that I learn on a spirit level and let him run with that, with his genealogy research. And, it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration.
I love that. I want to share just a quick little tale, and then I want to shift to a different question. But I had an experience similar with 23andMe. I did it a long time ago. And I know that orphaned grandmother's, she was born in Bakersfield when it was still Mexico. But her ancestry was from Guanajuato in Mexico. And, this whole, for years on 23andMe, it was like, broadly Native American / whatever, like marked the entire west side of the Americas. And only in the last couple of years, they've actually pinpointed down that your ancestors likely came from this very particular region in Mexico, Guanajuato. And it was like, there's something really, I don't know, it's pretty fucking cool actually to be like, oh so yeah, cool. It's not so just cool. Not that. I'd like to shift a little bit to the topic of plant medicine. And I talk pretty openly about my psychedelic assisted therapy work. But I'm really interested in the way that you might work with plants that aren't necessarily a classical psychedelic or something like that. You mentioned foods and things like this, but I wonder if there's ways that you work with plants in relationship to your ancestry.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I mentioned olive. That's a strong one that's there. And, it's interesting because if you can just get like just the smallest opening of a thread to follow, that can open up all kinds of interesting things. So about that ancestor that was from Guanajuato, like something that one could do would be to, learn about what are the plants in that region. What are the foods that people are eating? What are the fibers and textile fibers? What are the dyes? What are the patterns and textiles? Like what are the things that are still alive now that have been passed down, and how to connect with those, look at those images, put those plants in your body, make a tea out of whatever, or, I think about stuff that comes up now, in these modern, new agey spiritual circle stuff about white sage, for example. I think people have this idea that burning sage is like the only thing you can do. And, if you talk to people from in and around what's now Los Angeles, that's that have been harvesting and working with white sage because it's the plant that grows there, getting really pissed that this is being sold in these, commercial level stuff for people to buy and appropriate. And it's a bummer, it's a real bummer, not just because of the appropriation piece, but about what's being missed or left behind about what our own ancestors would work with. So for example, rosemary. If you've ever burned dry rosemary, it smells a bit like sage. It's a plant from the Mediterranean and from the region that many of my family members are from. It's considered both a culinary herb and is also something that you can work with as a sacred smoke or smudge, or it's a plant of the dead. And getting into some of the plant lore from the places that you suspect or know your own family members to be from, watch what happens when you start using the plants that they know. Just watch what happens. And those are absolutely ways to move into deeper relationship with our own people, because, when we talk about our ancestors and being in the DNA, in our bodies, we have inherited that. That's not the only thing. We're also built from, that might be the map, but the flesh is built from what we do in our own lifetime. So what we eat now, and there is, we're a mixture of things. We're of the foods and the places where we drink the water and breathe the air, and the foods that we eat, and the things you grow in your own garden, and the eating local and all that. But we're also built from many, many generations of eating these other plants and these other foods and these other things from other places. So it's very interesting to think about working with medicinal plants that might be from the various traditions and locations that our families members have come from, because they have actually built the bodies of people for all this time. And there is, I don't know if there's a mechanism that's out there that we've been able to look at on a more science-based way, but there's a truth in that. Our bodies have been built eating these certain foods, and we adapt and we change, and we are made to eat certain things because we've been doing it a long time. We adapt to the places that we're from. And I think that is what gets to a really tender and beautiful topic around the concept of indigeneity, being of a place, in deep relation to a place for a long, long time, long enough for our bodies to have moved into alignment with what grows there and what we eat from there, and that's something that takes generations and generations and generations to establish, but it's a possible thing,
I would love to speak to that a little, because this is a tricky one for me personally, and I can imagine for you too, but you've done more of the work in this area. But what's tricky for me is I'm first generation American on my dad's side and second on my mom's. I come from blended families from different traditions that moved here, or parts of America, but then also move to where they came here from. So there was a lot of not, at least to my understanding, for some of them, like not being settled in a place. And that
Right.
I find a little like, so I guess my question is, and it's a broad question, not just for me specifically, but how does one get connected to the place if the place shifts? And I guess that would even relate to the here and now. Like, for example, you're taking over this beautiful new property. How do you connect to a place that isn't part of your ancestry, perhaps, or that your ancestors moved through?
Right. Yeah. Like you're talking about migration, and that
Yeah.
is, that's not just a human thing, that happens with plants as well. That happens with all creatures, and it happens with life. Life is, um, things I've learned in ayahuasca ceremonies, right? Like things I've learned from plants that are not the plants of my own people, but that carry deeper messages about cycles of life and death, and like life is ever moving. It's like endlessly creative and playful and exploratory. And so I think that part of that is, there's an opportunity to kind of like connect with that piece of about being, exploring and wandering and encountering things that are new and are wonderful and are unfamiliar and surprising, and bringing some curiosity to it. And so there is a piece about encountering the unfamiliar or the new and bringing some respect and curiosity to it, versus, a lot of what colonial history has been about, which is overtaking what already exists in a place and imposing something that might make you feel more comfortable, whether it's the religion, whether it's the, land practices, whatever it is. So there's a orientation to the new, into the diverse, into the unfamiliar, that can be like, we can approach it in a more respectful way. And I think about it like this. When I am a guest at someone else's house, when I go to the doorstep of someone that I don't know, like, what is the polite and respectful way to encounter those others? And partly is to announce yourself, to knock on the door and say, hello, I'm here, acknowledging that there's someone else who's already here, and to introduce yourself, and to introduce yourself, not, and this is where it starts to get interesting with the ancestral piece, because now that I've been doing deeper work in understanding who my own people are, where we've come from, some of those traditions and things, once I've done a little more work to understand who I am, I can introduce myself more properly. I'm like, I'm Kirra, and I am of all these people who have come before me. I represent them here. I'm the one amongst the living. So it's like knocking, saying hello, announcing who you are and what your purposes are for being there. And, if you're a good guest, perhaps you bring a gift, perhaps you bring something, you bring something to the table. And that is what I have found to be the most, simple, respectful way about coming to any new place. And then you give those others an opportunity to welcome you or not, or to whatever degree is appropriate. And then you need to build trust over time. And that might be something like, that I'm working on here in this new place that I live, but it won't be done in my lifetime. So, I think that there's a lot of greetings like that got missed, that didn't happen, especially here in the Americas with the colonial history and continuing disrespect that is ongoing here. Those greetings haven't been made. And it's almost impossible to do that in a complete way without understanding who we represent, who we're from, and we can make those introductions now, even if they haven't happened in the past. And then we can let our own ancestors and the ancestors of the land where we live now sit with each other and have some conversations, but we can make the introductions because we're the living, we're here.
I fucking love talking to you. I miss hanging out in your kitchen and drinking coffee, just going blah, 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 blah for hours and hours. I could talk to you all day about this stuff. It's so great. We're getting close to an hour. So I'd love for us to open it up if there's any questions that people have that are watching live. And if there's questions during the replay, put them in here and I'll try to send them to you, Kirra. You could maybe answer them.
Sure.
And it's also a tradition in my Midweek with Meaning show to pull a card to kind of give a lens in relationship to what we've been talking about. And so I'm going to retire last week's card, which was Alliance. Can you see it okay? It's a little tiny, which is a really beautiful one. And I'm working with the Sacred Earth Oracle because I made a promise to this deck to get to know it a little bit more. So I work with it on a regular once a week for this show. So if you would just hold with me, is there any more messages or whatever that might help us contemplate relating to our ancestors over this Samhain, Day of the Dead, Halloween season? What might be a lens or perspective to help bring into that this next week to give it more meaning and more connection to us? And I am down to follow your lead about what to do with these cards to draw it since we're doing this together. So I'm just going to shuffle till you tell me to do something different.
All right. I would make, and I am making, a direct invitation to our own wise and well, benevolent, empowered, full strength, full power, fully rooted, just bright and shining ancestors to speak through these cards, to have a place to move through here into the material world with your guidance for us now. And I'm asking for you to do that. So, Angela, you go ahead and you flip around. And the way I do it is I use my hand. I just touch the cards and I find what little edge or corner or surface feels pleasurable to me, feels good, and linger on that. And that's the card I pull.
I pulled two.
Great.
They both came out together. And there's this one, which is called Moderation. Can you see it? It seems to have this beautiful character with hummingbirds. I can't tell its gender, but it's got a gorgeous necklace looking thing and this fiery crown plus these hummingbirds. And then this other beautiful one that seems super appropriate called Revolution.
Moderation and revolution. Those feel.
And this one has a woman with, it looks like the moon is in the background, but it also looks like the sun is in her hand, and she seems to be holding a lotus or a flower or maybe a handful of leaves. And there's different moons along the bottom with birds flying, and she looks like she might have a veil-y wing on. Which one would you like me to read a little bit about, or what are these bringing up for you if we're talking about our ancestors?
Well, I thank you for showing the images of that and not letting it just be the word alone. Because at first I was like, revolution. And then with the moons, I'm like, oh, revolution. Movement and cycle. Movement and cycles. Yeah. And that moderation piece, it's don't get too committed to one extreme or another because things are moving.
They're moving in this revolution.
That's my
Okay,
that's my bid.
I love it. Let's take a quick peek at revolution. There's a poem that comes right at the end of revolution, which perhaps I'll read that first. It says, "A leaf is falling, smiling at the clouds in total freedom and trust. The divine nature holds all in its embrace. In the heart of a bustling city, in the soul of a forest, a glowing ray shines through. A lonely seagull glides over the ocean while the desert sings its soulful song. A whisper, a cry. A child is born and someone sheds a tear of joy, while someone else cries tears of sadness. The world goes on turning. The divine nature is present in all things." I don't know about you, but I have goosebumps. If we just ask the ancestors to speak to us, like, that feels perfect. Oh. Wow. I might just type up what these say and maybe post them later, or maybe just send it to you. I just want to see if moderation has anything that jumps out. That poem was perfect. Where is it? Where is moderation? Here we go. It says, "Salt is essential to every life form on Earth. In the wild, animals visit areas where there are natural salt deposits and lick the ground or eat the clay to get the salt they require. In the human body, salt is necessary for the function of nerves and muscles, for the regulation of fluids and blood pressure control. Our relationship with salt can be traced back to the very earliest of farmers. It was used to preserve meats, to tend wounds, and to scatter on the land of enemies to deem it barren. Salt has been used as currency and included in religious offerings. There are references to salt in ancient Egyptian art, the Vedas, and the Hebrew Bible. In ritual, salt was linked to preservation, purification, protection, and the true essence of the self. Only 6% of the salt that is manufactured in today's world is used in food. It is used in many thousands of ways in the production of glass, rubber, dyes, etc. Salt is vital and versatile, but it also makes up 97% of the Earth's water. It also makes 97% of the Earth's water undrinkable for humans. Putting your toe in the water won't tell you how salty it is." That's fascinating to me when we speak about ancestors. And like, here we just mentioned an element. We didn't talk about the mineral work and working with any of that piece, but here we are with a mineral that is in our bodies, much like we're talking about our ancestors are in our bodies and yet in the world, and how something that's used in current times actually has these deep, deep roots. And this also speaks a bit to migration, because this has moved with us as humans throughout our time. Anything you want to share about that? Anything jumping out from?
Just think about it's going to take me a little while to understand like the connection with moderation and salt. I feel like that there's a little bit more inquiry for me there, and I'm gonna chew on that for a while. I'm gonna hold that and with some curiosity for a while.
I can read a little more about it if you like, which I think might actually give it some perspective as I glance at it.
Okay.
For sure. Okay. It says, its earthly meaning of this card: a coping mechanism, a helper, or an attitude that has served you has reached its limits. The impulse to pull back from a situation or relationship, a stray word or action offers a taste of things to come. Letting go of moderation reveals more than expected. Resist or be resistant to, adding insult to injury. When you remove emotions, what is left? That's interesting. I don't know if that made it even more complex.
Well, insult to injury, I'm feeling like salt on the wounds, like, yeah, there's like a calming it down, which is interesting in combination with that other card with revolution. Wasn't a fiery take on revolution. It was sort of like a peaceful cyclical bit on revolution. And I think about things like salt. I'm like, how's salt getting into my body right now? Where is that salt coming from and where is it going to? And how does something like that cycle through bodies and move from place to place? Like how is that as something really valuable, like coming here from Mendocino, being maybe from the coast, that might be the closest like wild access to salt. And how does that move through the food, through like salty fish or salmon, or, how does that move through my body? I'll just drop this one thing before before we close. Another magical practice of mine, just to like, I'm a fairly feral human being. And one of the ways that I connect with this land and all land and relationship with my body to the places that I am, it's not just a one-way relationship. It's not just me eating the food and the deer and the plants and drinking the water here, but my body is going back into the ground. And one of the ways that my body is going back into the ground is urination, blood, sweat, tears, like what comes from my body. And so that is one way that I speak to the place that's here, which is letting the water move through my body and carrying the salt and carrying whatever needs to depart from my body out through my body and into the earth to be of use to something else. So I think about if you peed in the same spot all the time, like if any of you have dogs out there, that that's just going to burn all the plants in a place. It's not moderate. It's too much. But a little bit here and there, there's nitrogen, there's minerals, there's things that support plants to grow. And so that our bodies themselves, are transport for blessings and for chemicals and for minerals. And, at this time where we're talking about cycles of life and death, I think about, if I could create a really healthy body for myself in this lifetime, what a gift it would be to the ground where my bones lie. So
Fuck yeah.
I'll just leave it there. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. Hell yeah. Thank you, Kirra, so much for having this lovely conversation with me. I hope we can do this again in the future. And for everyone that's watched us or joins us for parts of it or watches the replay, thank you for joining us. Again, you can reach Kirra at rootwisdom.com to learn more about her and her practices and services that she offers. And yeah, be back here next week. We're going to be moving, of course, next month into the month of gratitude. So I am so grateful that you joined. So thank you, everyone. I'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.